In this episode, I'm going to show you how I built this polytunnel step by step. I'm Tony O'Neill and this is Simplified Gardening, where I show you how to garden in a simpler way. The first thing that we need to do is to clear the area of any weeds, and I just literally hoe these off because there's no need for them. They're just going to get in our way. But the most important thing is to ensure that we have a level playing field when we're putting up a polytunnel. The leveler the ground, the much better. And as you can see here, I had to raise the ground at one end of the plot quite substantially. So here I'm using some sleepers in order to make sure that that ground is nice and level. Once we've got the ground relatively level, I moved quite a lot of manure and soil here just to make sure that it was right and level, which gave us a solid base in which to start the installation. Now here I'm using the 3-4-5 rule, and this is to make sure that the polytunnel is square, and then I was able to mark out the lines, and here I'm drilling in the supports. Now these are like a big corkscrew and they are set 6 feet on center, so you literally measure off 6 foot and put in the next one. Once they're in, these need to be screwed down to around about 40 centimeters or 45 centimeters left sticking out of the ground, and here you can see all of them in place. Next, I lay out all of the parts for the polytunnel, and these are laid out along the sides. I've attached the base rails here, and now I'm just attaching some of the bracketry that's required for the end rails, and there's 3 of them. Next, we place out all of the hoops in their locations and we screw these together. Now by doing this, it just makes life much easier for you than trying to do them individually. So here I'm putting on the joining bracket for the top of each of the hoop. Now this is like a figure of 8 bracket which will hold the top rail in as well. Now I've got Tina to give me a hand to stand these up. This is one part of the job you can't do on your own, so it needs a couple of you, and they just simply slip over the upright poles, and if you've done this right and they're all level and plumb, then this section will be really easy. And as you can see, we now have that in. Now I'm placing in the ridge frame, and these are poles that just clamp into the figure of 8 brackets that we screwed onto the hoops earlier on when we attached them, and they are very easy to put up. You just need a 10mm spanner, and as you can see, this is the last one going in, and that completes the ridge frame. Now what I'm doing here is I am raising the end hoops only up 10 centimeters because you can't do this after the fact, so this has to be done before we do anything else. So lift the pole up 10 centimeters and then secure it. So that's nice and tight there now. What we're doing here now is attaching the base rail, and the base rail runs the entire perimeter, but we're only doing the sides at the moment. We don't do the ends for the time being because the base rail for the ends requires the door frames to be installed. So we're just attaching the base rail right throughout the building at the moment. Now a simple little bracketry that goes on, and it makes life much easier. All I'm doing here is I'm moving the brackets that we put on earlier on, which supports the door frame, out of the way so that I can now put in the diagonal bracing. Now when I was attaching the base frame earlier on, I actually screwed in the bottom end of this brace rail, and this prevents wind from causing the sides of the tunnel or the front and back of the tunnel to collapse in. For your doors, you simply lay out the parts. This is the actual frame itself, and you literally just drop in some bolts into the channels and screw it together. It's really easy, and the plates that come with it allow you to ensure the door is square. And I'm just checking that I have got all the bolts that is required in the actual slots here. So now we've done all of the base rails and we have the door done, we can now run in the bracketry for the base rail for the ends of the polytunnel. Now this is where the doors will be, and as you can see, I'm just connect this straight into the clip that's there. I'm having to move some soil out of the way because it won't quite level there, but it's essential that you get this section right. Once it's in, there is nothing for it to attach to at the moment because the door is not in place, so you just attach both the ends of this rail. Exactly the same thing on the other side, and just tighten that up. Now what this does, it gives you the location for the door, but we need to run a string between the two end hoops here now to make sure that we have the door in alignment to the front of the tunnel. So once this is in place, that's what we do next. We run that string. Here I'm just lifting the door up in place, and this is up against that string, and it will just allow me to push down and mark the locations of the post doors so that we can dig the holes that are required. Now this needs to be quite deep, so this secures the base of the door frame itself, and literally, as you can see, I'm just pushing it down so it marks exactly where I need to dig those holes. Now digging those holes, we dig, the string is there to make sure that we're in the right location when we line up this door frame, and we dig both the holes relatively deep, and we test to make sure that the door isn't too deep and it's the right level. So you may have to do this a couple of times in order to get down far enough, and I think I was down around about 12 to 18 inches into the ground with the aluminium frame. And that's the great thing about this tunnel, because all of the frame is aluminium, there is no chance of it rotting or anything like a timber frame would. So now once we have the door frame in place, we just literally backfill all of the hole and compress that soil back around the level of the door. And here I'm just attaching that base rail to the frame itself, and it has a little sliding clip that just screws into the back of the base rail to a nut that was already pre-installed in that door frame. Now I'm laying out the crop bars, so I'm just putting them in position because it's better than walking back and forth when you're up and down ladders. So cut the plastic from around them and lay them all out in the locations. That's one for each pole. And as you can see here, they're all laid out ready to install. Now when installing, it's important you put the P-clips on, and these poles, you might think that the pole itself goes on the inside of the clip, but it doesn't. It goes on the outside, otherwise the clip doesn't tighten down enough to clamp the pole. And when you put them on, you don't want to do it too tight because you need to move this pole. Get yourself a nice long spirit level. I have a 6-foot spirit level here. It's important that these crop bars are really level, so we just loosen it up and we can move this crop bar to get it all level. And as you can see, every crop bar is now done. Here I'm laying out the supports for the crop bars, and these will attach to the hoop itself and the crop bar, which gives further structural support to the not only the polytunnel but to the crop bars themselves, so that they will help to hold the weight of the crops that are going to be hanging from them, such as the tomatoes and cucumbers, things like that. And again, these are simply those little clips, and it's important that these also go on the outside of those clips. Here I'm attaching the bracketry now for the upper rail. Now this is the upper rail that will support the curtain that will come down later on, and so this is essentially exactly the same as the base rail. You just bolt it all together, and you then install the actual rails themselves. But as you can see, I'm going along each of the posts here and just securing the bracket, and as you can see, it's just a piece of rail that's a little bit larger than the rail that's there, and we can then slide the rail into these. And it's a really good way in which to put these things together, because it's fully adjustable and it allows you. Now when I put these rails in, I kept them at 100 centimeters above the original base rail. Here I'm running all of the bolts into the framework for the doors. Now these doors all come pre-cut and everything. All you've got to do is slide the bolts in, and as you can see, there is a square bracket. Now before I've done that, I've put the brush on the back of these. There's a thin layer channel in the back, and it has little sliding brushes which keep out the air from the doors, and I've slid those in, and now I'm just literally bolting together the door. These bolts and these plates make it really easy to make the door square, so you've got nothing to worry about. And it's just a case of moving the bolts into position and screwing them up, and it comes with a little small Allen key, so if you can put a flat pack furniture together, you can literally build this tunnel. It's really easy to do. Here I'm just attaching the rollers, 2 for each door, and these need to be around about 10 centimeters away from the edge of the door. I've pushed them all the way up to the edge of the door for the time being, and I will alter them later, but it's just that I wanted them in the track ready so that I could see exactly where they need to be. Now one important factor here is to ensure that we put all the hotspot tape on all of the metal surfaces that will likely touch the plastic, because in the summer these pipes can get quite hot and we don't want the plastic melting to it. So this hotspot tape prevents that happening, but it also helps it to pull the plastic over later. And as you can see, I'm also covering every single bracket that goes around a pipe as well, so for all of the crop bars, all the attachments and the bolts, anything that might come into contact with the plastic, and we just make sure that they're all covered too. So get a few friends, pull the plastic over. You don't need to get it tight at this time, but when securing, you need to secure it at the doors first. So people think that you've got to do the sides first, and that's a bit of a mistake. So the first thing we need to do is get the tops of the doors done, and this will allow you to tension the plastic properly. So here I'm just putting a wiggle wire across the door frame, and these have channels, and this is how the plastic is installed on this tunnel, and it has little wiggle wire. Now it's important to wear glasses and gloves on here, and I didn't do it. I made the decision not to do it. I'm an adult the same as everybody else, and everybody that helped me here wasn't wearing them either. But what I would suggest, if you're going to do this, make sure you're wearing glasses. Once you've done the both doors and pulled it tight, then we need to look at doing the sides, and you don't need to get this really tight, but as you'll see in a moment, the wiggle wire, I was telling people to stay out of its way, and people were having to put their hands in the way. It can be quite an unruly thing, but just bear in mind that that's there. Wear glasses when you're doing this. and you simply work along the whole base rail, working this wire in which traps it. Now I made a mistake here, and that'll become apparent a little bit later on, and I'll explain exactly what I did and how I rectified that mistake later on. But you just literally work down the one side, fastening the plastic in so that it's nice and tight, and then once you've done that, pull the other side down so it's taut, but you haven't got to get it drum tight, and you do the exact same thing on the other side. Just work your way backwards, putting that wiggle wire in. Gloves are really handy here. I wasn't wearing them because I was getting them trapped, but I had sore hands at the end of the day doing this, so I really suggest you do it. Once you've got the sides done, as you can see, this plastic isn't that tight, but here I'm having Tina come across and give me a hand in a moment. And essentially what we're doing here is we've cut a 45-degree cut, and we are going to wiggle wire the bottom, and we've pulled the bottom. All the plastic is at the top of the door at the moment, is being held up out of the way. We're not trying to put any folds down the bottom half of the door. We want that to remain nice and square and flat, and we'll put all the folds in the top of this door. And here you can see me starting to fold these doors. Now it's really important when you fold in this plastic that the folds face downwards on the outside so that they don't hold any water. And as you do a few folds, you trap it in with the wiggle wire, and you just work around the door, and as you'll see in a moment, it becomes quite a neat way to finish up the sides of the tunnel. And it's really good because the wiggle wire really traps that plastic in, and you just keep working right the way up to the top of the door. You do the same thing for both ends, and essentially that's the sides done. What I'm doing here is I'm now raising the inside hoops, not the ends but just the insides, up that 10 centimeters each, and this is what's going to create the plastic to be drum tight. Here's where I made that mistake. Remember I was mentioning earlier on? Well, essentially you were supposed to trap this green netting into the base rail when you put the plastic on, and I totally must have skipped over that part in the instructions. So what I'm doing here is I'm digging out from underneath the base rail, and I'm pulling that green netting through, and I'm going to trap that in with an extra piece of wiggle wire and then refill the hole. So essentially I've sorted myself out there, but if you were to be laying this on concrete you wouldn't be able to do that. So just bear that in mind. That green netting needs to be cut before you put the base rail in, but I was lucky enough in that I could do that. And here I'm just cutting that netting now, but like I said, you know, this should have been done before the actual plastic went on because it needs to be trapped in that base rail. I was just lucky that I was able to do it after the fact. Just roll out this netting and cut it big enough so that you can leave an overhang. Here I've cut the windows out, and you just need a 50 centimeter circle. I used a dustbin lid. I drew with a marker pen around it, and I cut this out with a Stanley knife, and I made sure that there was no ragged edges. Here Tina and I are rolling out the curtain. Now this enables us to shut those windows, and we're just rolling it out, and we are placing the steel poles on there. These come in sections and they screw together, and these are plastic clips for the bottom of this rail. This is where I'm now pulling the net curtain through the top rail before I clip it in. I've learnt my lesson, and I'm making sure that this section was done right. So you pull this net curtain over and you trap it over that rail, ready for when you put the wiggle wire on. So here we have the rail at the base of the tunnel, and we're lifting the plastic, and I'm trapping that net curtain and the plastic that is the wind up window into that central base rail. and that will trap it all so that it never comes out of there. And we just work along on both sides. Then we attach the handle, and this is the winding handle for this curtain, and this is attached with a self-tapping screw. Once we've done that, we add in these wiggle wire guides, and they just protrude out to the side of the tunnel a little bit, and we tie off this string. Now what this does, it keeps the actual curtain tight to the tunnel when it's up and down, so that the wind doesn't get behind it. And they just act like a guide, and it's just a case of hooking that rope through, bringing it back up and tying it off. And there is one of these for each pole, as you can see, and this is the curtain wound up. Here you can see me winding up the other side of the curtain, so you can see how easy it is to open all of the windows at once. Here I'm just installing the bracketry for our double doors, and it's just a case of drilling a couple of holes and putting in a self-tapping screw. Now these screws would probably have gone in on their own, but it found it easier to drill. Now this job is much easier when there's two of you, but there was only me, so I leaned up the rail against the polytunnel and I slid the doors into that rail, and we can adjust these at a later stage if we require. But now the doors are in, I was able then to lift that rail just a touch and screw the rail into the door frame itself. I'm only putting a single screw at the moment, and I will do the same thing on the other side, but I need to check that it's level first. So get your big spirit level like we suggested before, lower it off, lift it up a little bit, and then screw that door in to the frame again. Once we know it's level, we can put in all the extras and the doors will slide, and there we have it. So we've got our double sliding doors. At this end of the polytunnel, however, I opted not to have a door, and I was going to put in some mesh so that I was able to allow more ventilation, because it's really important for ventilation in this tunnel. But what I'm going to do here is I will attach a piece of perspex on the inside via a couple of brackets that I can remove or I can put in place, and that'll be attached on the inside. This netting is wiggle wired into the door frame and buried in the ground, so it's well attached. And essentially that's the end of the polytunnel build on the externals. All we have now is all the internals to do. So there it is, guys. As you can see, the tunnel is done. I've just got to alter this clip on this one here so it rolls up a little bit further, but the tunnel itself is done. It's all working really well, and it's a really good space. Now I've been doing some work on the inside, as you can see. I'll show you in a moment, but that's the tunnel. It's nice and tight. The doors need a bit of a wash where I was working on them, but if I open it up here now, and you can see the tunnel has staging, which I did yesterday on the full length of the tunnel. Now that's going to be fantastic for the chilies. I got a few bits and bobs I've got to finish bolting in down the end there, like the cross bracing and stuff like you see on these ones. They're missing off the end because there was a few bolts short. But essentially the tunnel itself is done. It's got some good ventilation, and this is the section I was on about where I'm going to put in some bracketry to hold in a piece of perspex in there, and I'll use that as a door closer because I didn't want another door there. But you can see just how good a space this is going to be, and all the crop bars are all at the top there, ready for me to put in some of these 2x1s across the top, and I can hang things from them then for the tomatoes and things like that. Already the weeds are starting to grow. It's been a fair while building this, but it's been a good tunnel to build. It's been relatively easy apart from the odd mistake that I made along the way. But that's it.
So before I go, I want to tell you about Simplified Gardening, which is my website. I've got loads of articles on there, and I urge you all to go and have a look over there. There is tons of articles that will help you all around the garden with growing care guides and with how to sort out issues within your garden. So I urge you to go and take a look at that. simplifiedgardening.com, really easy to remember. And if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. If you've enjoyed this build, I did a build a few years ago on how I built my other polytunnel, which is a homemade polytunnel, and I'll link that video right here for you. Anyway, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.